buy a building, install a sound system, sell overpriced vodka to people who are already drunk. That is the dream version of owning a nightclub. In a typical year, the average American nightclub brings in somewhere around $2 million in revenue and keeps less than 5% of it as actual profit. In New York City alone, one liquor liability insurance renewal can cost more than most first-time owners budgeted for their entire opening year. One legendary nightclub empire, 4 venues, decades of cultural influence, tens of millions in annual revenue at its peak, ended up buried under more than $10 million in debt and federal tax liability. Here is what this actually costs. The entry cost starts with the build-out, and it is brutal. A mid-size urban nightclub, roughly 10,000 square feet, needs soundproofing, structural reinforcement for crowd load, and a stage or DJ booth built to code. That alone runs between $300 and $500 per square foot in a major market, landing somewhere around $3.5 million before a single bottle of liquor is ordered. Then comes the liquor license. In open license states, this might cost $12,000 in filing fees. In quota-restricted states like California or New Jersey, where the number of licenses is capped, an existing license has to be purchased on the secondary market, and those routinely trade for $200,000 to $800,000 depending on the city. Sound and lighting systems for a room built to hold a crowd properly run another $250,000. Security infrastructure, metal detectors, camera systems, reinforced entry points, adds another $80,000. First-year insurance premiums and deposits, covering general liability plus a liquor liability rider, run close to $140,000, paid up front before the doors even open. There is also a layer of pre-construction cost that almost never appears in an owner's original napkin math. Architect and engineering fees for occupancy load calculations, fire marshal review, ADA compliance upgrades, and the permit expediting fees that come with any building classified for public assembly. Those combined typically run $120,000 to $200,000 before a contractor ever picks up a tool, and delays in that approval process routinely add 3 to 6 months of dead rent on a lease that has already started. Add pre-opening staff training, a soft launch marketing push, and opening night production costs, and total entry cost for a serious mid-size club lands at approximately $4.2 million. That is the number nobody puts on the mood board. Now the operating cost stack, the one that runs every single month whether the room is full or empty. Rent in a viable nightlife district runs roughly $40,000 a month, $480,000 a year, because nightclubs need foot traffic and zoning that residential neighbors will not fight. Payroll, bartenders, door staff, security, DJs, promoters, management, for a club running 4 nights a week comes to approximately $1.1 million annually once overtime and holiday premiums are included. Liquor licensing renewal, compliance filings, and the lawyer who keeps you from losing that license runs $60,000 a year. Full insurance coverage, now scaled to actual operations instead of pre-opening estimates, climbs to around $180,000 annually. Utilities and the maintenance contract for sound and lighting systems that get pushed to their limit every weekend add $90,000. Marketing, promoter payouts, and talent booking to keep the room from going quiet run $200,000 a year. Cleaning, repairs, and the inevitable property damage from a room full of intoxicated people adds $60,000 more. One more line item almost always gets underestimated: credit card and point-of-sale processing fees. On a room doing the bulk of its business through card payments, processing fees typically run between 2 and 3% of gross transaction volume, which on 6-figure monthly revenue quietly adds another $70,000 to $90,000 a year that most first-time owners never model at all. Added up and fixed operating overhead, before a single drink is sold, sits at approximately $2.17 million a year. Now the revenue reality. A club running 4 nights a week, averaging 800 guests a night, at an average spend of $40 per head, across cover charges, bar sales, and bottle service, generates roughly $32,000 a night. Multiply that across 4 nights and 52 weeks, and gross revenue lands at approximately $6.6 million a year. That number looks enormous until the costs get subtracted. Cost of goods on liquor typically runs 20 to 22% of bar revenue, which works out to roughly $1.4 million a year. Subtract that, and the $2.17 million in fixed overhead. Then subtract debt service on that $4.2 million build-out, call it $420,000 a year, at a realistic commercial rate. What is left is net profit of approximately $610,000 on $6.6 million in revenue. That is a margin of roughly 9%. and that number only holds if absolutely nothing goes wrong for 52 straight weeks. Nothing stays that clean for long. The one external variable that quietly destroys this margin is the cost of debt itself. Between March 2022 and July 2023, the Federal Reserve raised the federal funds rate from near zero to above 5%, the fastest tightening cycle in 4 decades. Nightclub buildouts are almost always financed with variable-rate commercial loans, because traditional banks treat nightlife as high-risk lending and demand floating terms. A club that locked in debt service assumptions at 3% interest in 2021 was suddenly refinancing or absorbing rate resets at 8 or 9% by 2023. On a $4 million build-out loan, that difference alone adds well over $150,000 a year in interest cost, money pulled directly out of a margin that was already sitting under 10%. This is not a new pattern. During the 2008 financial crisis, commercial credit for nightlife and hospitality properties tightened sharply as banks reclassified bars and clubs as high-risk lending categories almost overnight, and a wave of nightclub closures across major U.S. cities followed within 18 months as owners hit refinancing walls they had never budgeted for. The lesson repeats every cycle. A nightclub's profit margin is thin enough that it was never actually built to survive a sustained increase in the cost of money. Yet the cost of money is the one input every owner assumes will stay fixed. To understand where this ends, look at what happened to one of the most influential nightclub empires in American history. At its peak in the early 1990s, owner Peter Gatien controlled 4 major New York City venues: Limelight, Tunnel, Palladium, and Club USA, pulling in tens of millions of dollars a year combined and shaping nightlife culture across the country. Then, in 1996, a promoter connected to the Limelight scene was convicted of murdering a drug dealer, a case that became national news and triggered an aggressive citywide crackdown on nightclubs under Mayor Rudy Giuliani's quality of life enforcement policy. Health and fire inspectors began showing up weekly. Licenses were suspended and reinstated on a cycle that made stable operations impossible. Federal prosecutors then opened a tax evasion case against Gatien himself, and in 1998 he pleaded guilty and was ordered to pay back taxes reported in the range of nearly $2 million, on top of mounting legal fees from years of litigation. The clubs bled cash through suspensions, legal bills, and collapsing bookings as promoters fled to venues with cleaner reputations. By the early 2000s, the empire was sold off in pieces, Gatien was deported, and the original Limelight building was eventually converted into a retail marketplace. This was not a failure of taste or business instinct. It was a demonstration that nightlife businesses operate inside a regulatory blast radius, where a single incident anywhere in the building's orbit can trigger a collapse that has nothing to do with how well the bar is run. There is a cost that never shows up on a nightclub's opening year projection, and it is dram shop liability. In most states, a venue can be sued if it overserves a guest who then causes harm, whether that is a car accident, an assault, or a fall. Picture a single bottle service table on a Saturday night. 6 guests, 3 bottles, a $4,000 check. Roughly $3,000 of pure profit after cost of goods and staff tip-out. Now picture one of those guests leaving overserved and causing a DUI accident 2 hours later. Average dram shop settlements in the United States run from $100,000 to $300,000, and catastrophic cases involving serious injury or death routinely settle well into 7 figures. One table that generated $3,000 of profit can, months later, generate a legal bill that erases the profit from every table the club served that entire year. And unlike a bad month of sales, a dram shop judgment does not politely wait for cash flow to recover. It becomes a line the club's insurer and legal counsel are negotiating for years, quietly eating into every subsequent season's margin before the club even books its next event. There is another cost growing faster than any other line item on the sheet, and it is the one that can end the business in a single night rather than a single lawsuit. That cost is catastrophic event exposure, and the industry's defining case remains Twain's. The Station nightclub fire in Rhode Island, on February 20, 2003. Pyrotechnics used during a concert ignited flammable soundproofing foam on the walls, and the fire killed 100 people in a matter of minutes. The lawsuits that followed named the club owners, the band, the pyrotechnics company, and the foam manufacturer, and settlements across those cases ultimately totaled hundreds of millions of dollars. The direct financial impact on the venue itself was total and immediate. The business ceased to exist. Every nightclub operating today carries a version of this same exposure: overcrowding, blocked exits, or a single equipment failure sitting one bad night away from a liability event that no insurance policy fully covers and no profit margin can absorb. Scale changes some of this and makes other parts worse. What gets better? Cost of goods improves because larger operators negotiate volume liquor pricing, sometimes shaving 3 to 5 percentage points off cost of goods. Marketing efficiency improves because an established brand needs less paid promotion to fill the room. What gets harder? Regulatory scrutiny increases with visibility, because a bigger, more famous venue is a bigger target for inspectors, competitors, and lawsuits. Insurance premiums do not scale down proportionally, because insurers price catastrophic exposure per venue, not per dollar of revenue. Staffing complexity multiplies as headcount grows past what one manager can directly oversee. Brand equity compounds too. A club with 10 years of history can command higher cover charges and longer promoter waitlists than a first-year room, without spending $1 more on marketing to get there. But none of that changes the shape of the risk sitting underneath. A bigger room means a bigger crowd load, which means a bigger potential liability event, which means the insurance underwriter looking at that venue is pricing for the worst night it could ever have, not the average one. At a certain size, a nightclub stops being a hospitality business and becomes a real estate and risk management operation that happens to serve drinks. Now put two versions of the same year side by side. In the optimistic scenario, the club runs full houses 4 nights a week for 52 weeks, no lawsuits, no license suspensions, no major equipment failures, and staff turnover stays low. Net profit lands at approximately $610,000 on $6.6 million in revenue, a 9% margin. In the realistic scenario, one dram shop lawsuit settles for $180,000. One health code violation triggers a 3-week license suspension, costing roughly $190,000 in lost revenue. One sound system failure during a peak weekend costs $40,000 in emergency repair and lost bottle service bookings. Recalculate, and that $610,000 profit turns into a net loss of roughly $200,000. The difference between those two scenarios is one lawsuit, one suspension, and one equipment failure. None of these are exotic disasters. All 3 happen to someone in this industry every single week. Industry data consistently shows that somewhere around 60% of bars and nightclubs fail within their first 3 years. The primary cause is almost never bad music or bad taste. It is debt structure and cash flow, specifically over-leveraged build-outs paired with thin operating reserves that cannot absorb a single bad month. The clubs that survive share 5 specific habits. First, they keep fixed debt low relative to revenue rather than financing the entire build-out on variable-rate loans. Second, they diversify revenue beyond nightly liquor sales through private event rentals and daytime use of the space. Third, they hold a liquid cash reserve equal to 3 to 6 months of fixed operating costs, specifically to absorb a lawsuit or suspension without missing payroll. Fourth, they treat compliance and security as a core budget line rather than an afterthought, because the cost of prevention is always smaller than the cost of a single incident. Fifth, they negotiate lease terms tied to a percentage of revenue rather than accepting a fixed high rent that punishes them in a slow month. None of these 5 habits are exciting. None of them make for a good grand opening announcement. They are quiet, structural, unglamorous decisions made months before a single guest ever walks through the door, and they are almost always the actual difference between a club that is still open in year 5 and one that is not. Buy a building, install a sound system, sell drinks to people who are already drunk. That is still the dream. But the real number behind that dream is not the $6.6 million in annual revenue. It is the $100 million in lawsuit settlements that ended an entire industry's sense of safety in a single February night in 2003. A nightclub is not really a hospitality business. It is a leveraged bet against interest rates, liability, and regulation, one that happens to have good music playing while the clock runs. If this kind of forensic breakdown is useful, subscribe for more.